The foundations that we've talked about and the degree to which the director has to know every element of the play that we've been talking about. When he gets to that position of being the authority on the play, that's his first little job is completed, so to speak. People go forward all the time without completing that job, believe me. And most people, they used to say about directors, they were actors who couldn't act, so they started to direct. And most people really don't know what they're doing. And outside of a real theater environment, they didn't even pretend to care about all the things we've been talking about. If it's the little theater of Memphis, Tennessee, or Billings, Montana, or anything like that, it is just an activity for the people. They get together, hey kids, let's get together and put on a show. That's really what it's all about.
And do you find even in the professional theater, that it's still directors that don't really know what they're doing?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
When I came to New York, after I graduated with my master's and moved to New York, about a year later I was at home and I went to see my major professor. We just went out to eat for lunch. And we're talking about it, and I said, the most frustrating thing about New York was that none of the people in the theater know anything about theater. Because you see things done on Broadway over and over and over again where people don't know how to act, people don't know how to direct, do know how to sing, they do know how to dance, but that literal exhibition of physical abilities is about all you would see. And in straight plays, everything that you try to teach in Strasberg not to do is what people do. And every sense of the play that you see, where you know what the play is supposed to be, and it's obvious that the director didn't, and he is doing goofy things and so forth. And certainly the people who thought of themselves as auteur directors who don't care what the play is, they care what they want to do with it. It's for that reason, over that first year that I had been here and seen a lot of things, that I said that to my professor. Now, obviously, that wasn't literal. Walter Kerr, who was the Sunday drama critic for the Times, did know, and he would talk about things and so forth. And John Simon, who was reviewing for New York Magazine for years, did know. And I have seen him, both in print and in an interview, talk about it. And when he talks about it, he's right. Because what he says is a character has to be a certain thing. Not every actor can be that. If the character is a beautiful woman who the play works because she's a beautiful woman, like Juliet or Roxanne in Cyrano de Bergerac, the women have to be beautiful. You can't cast Patti LuPone in that. So he's right about that. Now the thing is this, you could cast Patti LuPone if Patti LuPone knew how to make herself beautiful.
But could an actress who is not beautiful make herself beautiful?
Yeah. Or the director can make her. It's because what really appeals to the audience as beauty is not literal outside looks. It's manner, it's behavior, it's a sense of herself. It's a way she presents herself in what she wears and how she's shown. For instance, we did a production called An Evening in the Bedroom, which was 3 one-act plays, which I adapted from short stories of Guy de Maupassant. One of those is called The Signal. It's a story about a young, aristocratic French woman at the time of those stories. So it's the kind of, although they weren't Victorian, the women, if they had money, wore very lovely in clothes that people sewed on all day to make for them and so forth. And in France, everybody is titled, a marquis has a marquise for his wife and and so forth, and the count has a countess, and all of that. So in this story, it's a young, newly married marquise, and she has a friend who's an older woman, but she is in that European older woman aristocratic style of not having been a wife once, but maybe having been a wife 3 or 4 times, and besides that, having a French lover once and an Italian lover once, and having cruised the Mediterranean with a Russian lover once, and those kinds of things.
Experienced woman.
Yes. And one who's French totally in her sexuality, which means it's recognized differently, certainly from Americans and from British, say. So it's very French sensibility. And she has to be lovely in this. And what happens is the young girl, her husband goes off to do whatever he does every day, to work, but it's not work like going to an office. So he goes off and does whatever he does. And like most women of the aristocracy, she doesn't have anything to do with herself. So she sits in the window and watches people in Paris streets go by. And she enjoys it. And so across from her, there's another woman, she's young, about her age, who sits in the window every day, and I think wearing a red dress. And she notices that the woman sits in the window and will look out, and there'll be a man on the street, and then the woman will do some very small smile or something, and the man comes inside. So she realizes, after a while of noticing this woman, that she's a prostitute, but a French prostitute, not a street walker, New York City prostitute, a courtesan, almost, although there's no court that she was working. The young marquis is fascinated by what she sees. How does this whole information transfer go on between the man on the street and the woman in the window? Because she looks, and she'll just do a tilt of her head slightly, and maybe a slight smile and so forth. And the man knows everything that comes in. She has watched that. The story starts out, the older, experienced woman is asleep early in the morning. Well, not early in the morning, aristocratic early. And there's a knocking on her door by her maid saying, "Oh, the Marquis de so-and-so is here. She must see her." And so she comes in and tells her this story. And the story is what I started to tell you. The whole pattern is, I saw this woman. She was doing this. She explains everything she's watching. And she said, so one day I thought, I wonder if I could imitate those little movements. And without wanting to, now she gets a guy coming up and knocking on her bedroom door. Because he comes to the door, he tells the maid that he has an appointment and she's waiting for him now. And so she's sitting there in the room and he pops in the door. She didn't know this was going to happen. She was just trying to see if she could do the nod of her head and a slight smile and the touch of her fan to her cheek or whatever it is. And so the guy comes up and her husband's coming home soon and he won't go away. The only way that he'll go away is if
she goes ahead and does the act.
Yes. And when he leaves, he says, this was so wonderful, I may even come back and see you tomorrow. And so now she's in a pickle.
Now what have I done?
And so she runs to her experienced woman friend to ask her, what do I do? What do I do? And she tells her the whole story. And the older woman says, was he handsome? Oh, yes, he was handsome. Well, was the experience good? Oh, yes, well, these things happen and don't worry about it and so forth. And, when he left her money on her dresser, the man did, because that's what one does. And so she's so concerned, and at the end of the story, she says, never tell your husband. And if the man tries to come back, report him to the police. And so the girl says, yes, but what do I do with the money he left? And the older woman says, buy your husband a nice present. And so it's a very little French story. Now, the person who has to play
the experienced woman,
has to be French, very pretty.
French or capable of doing?
No. I don't mean the actress. I'm talking about the character.
The character.
French is not something that you are just because you say I'm French. No, there's a whole behavior, especially aristocratic woman who's had multiple life experiences and therefore takes sexuality as if it's the dessert of life, so to speak. Not that, oh, this is serious, this is horrible, and it's a moral question, and one's in a quandary when one... No, this is the dessert of life. Well, we had in the company a woman who was gay, probably 40s. She was slim. It's the one who plays Olga when we did The Three Sisters. That's who I cast. Now, why would I cast her? Because in her own normal life, she was a little butch. She wasn't dyke-haired.
Yeah.
But she was not feminine at all. But I knew that she was a woman, and I knew she had a sensibility, and I knew that in there she would love to have an opportunity to doll herself up, but not have to do it in life, because she's obviously chosen not to. She wore pants always.
Right.
She didn't wear makeup. Her hair was straight, not waved. She was obviously a lesbian woman of her age. But she looked between 30 and 35, and her hair was up. It gave her an opportunity to play at all the femininity that I knew she had inside her. I worked with her and other things, and I talked to her and so forth. When she did it, she was marvelous. And even in the preparing of the production, when the costumer showed me what she was going to wear, this is what happens in it. Stage is dark. There's nothing in the room but a little dressing table, a little dressing chair, and a 4-poster bed with all of this drapery on it. Inside the 4-poster bed, behind the drapery, I put 2 3-inch Fresnels. And they were amber gel, and they were on obviously a different dimmer than everything else. And so you could barely bring it up. Stage was dark, barely brought up, and these beds started to appear and like glow. And this was from short stories, and there were narrative elements that I wanted in it, so I used a presentational style for the beginning of it. So what happened was those lights would come up, and she was sleeping in bed, and then she would sit up and tell the audience what the lines were. And then she snuggles back down. Then we have somebody knocking and so forth, and another person saying, "Oh, the marquise is here. She's got to see you." And then when the woman playing the younger woman came in with her problem, "I got to talk to you. I got to talk to you. I've been going crazy." Then it was all first person. So the end result was she was gorgeous in it. She was delicious. She was lovely. And when I was going to tell you before, when I saw the costume she was going to wear and how feminine and frilly it was, I made sure she would see it. That was a directorial thing. I was trying to get her, without her knowing it, to recognize that I knew that she had in her the ability to look good in this kind of a costume. And since she's an actress, I took her in once the lighting and everything was set. I just took her in. We weren't yet. She was early to a rehearsal. Other people weren't there yet. Took her into the theater. I said, "Stand up here, the back of the house." And so she stood on the top level of the seating. And I went over and stuck my arm through the lighting booth window. And I said, "Watch, this is how your one act is going to start. Raise the lights. And out of blackness, the bed starts to appear. You see this bed just come alive." And I said, "This is how it's going to start." And it was just so theatrically beautiful. It was wonderful. And it excited the hell out of her. So I let her revel in how good she was going to look. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to coax out of her the thing that I knew she had inside her. Now, without trying to, dealing only with where we came from a moment ago, talking about John Simon and how he talked about people's looks.
Yeah.
And you asked me, could you make someone beautiful? Yes, you can. In this manner. But you have to be aware of all of the things that it would take. You have to know that this woman is capable of doing it. Another lesbian woman who was not at all feminine, and even who was an actress, might not have gotten it out of, but I knew her. Now, all of this talk, fortuitously, brings us to what I want to talk about today, which is casting. So you have done it before, so how do you cast?
Well, you have to know what qualities you need in the character, what qualities are in the character, and you have to know that the actor is capable of going all the places that the character has to go through the length of the play, as well as being the character. So I think it's a question of knowing the character and then also knowing the journey that the character takes through the course of the play.
Right. So first of all, in connection with the things we've been talking to up to now, you have to be fully aware of all the elements in the character, not only how they are at the beginning, but all the things that they have to go through, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to find somebody who can do that. How do you find that out? Now, what I was talking about, what you'll find with a woman who's not particularly attractive is, regardless of how she has adjusted her life, there are times when she wanted to be attractive to men. And not only this is my opinion, which it is my opinion, actually it's more my assessment, because of what I know of behavior. I've observed, I've watched. Let's talk a little bit about casting. I asked you before, how do you cast? You say you find people who are generally, they got to play all the things that the character could play and so forth. So, how do you cast? How do you make sure, what tools do you use to make sure that the person who is coming to you will be good for that? Well, what do people usually do when they cast them?
They talk to the person, sometimes interview, and sometimes direct audition.
Most of the time, it's direct audition. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although you hear stories of course, Elia Kazan talking about that he relied much more on talking to the person, talking to James Dean and saying, "This is my guy." It wasn't James Dean up there doing a monologue for him. He was looking for the person.
Well,
qualities within the person's essence, who they are, whether they have the right qualities for the character.
So, again, with that in mind, what do you do? What did you do, for instance?
First I had them do something initially to see what they brought to what skill level. I had them do some kind of monologue at first to see where they were at with their
What do
development.
you mean, some kind of? You just asked them to bring in a short monologue.
Yeah. I wanted to see how
it's fine.
How
they handled. I'm only asking
how they handled that.
I'm not asking so I can point out you were wrong.
And then I went to the material to see if in reading the material, working the material with me, they seemed to suit the character and had the right qualities that I was looking for the character. And
what do you mean by the qualities?
For instance, with George, there was it's hard for me to articulate what those. I was looking for that kind of, definitely a youthfulness, a boyish thing with George, and because it seems like in the play he's not as developed, of course, as Emily. He's not as mature as Emily, and so I was looking for an immaturity in a sense for that character. I'm reading somebody who's the father as an example. I'm looking for type of maturity where that person could relate to something of that the doctor goes through, the maturity that an older man would have, that a father would have.
Now, you have to audition for Our Town. Where do you start?
Where do you start the casting process?
Yeah. Where do you start? What's the first thing that you did, and what's the first thing that one should do?
Yeah. Well, again, I think the first thing I did was to see what level of development and what essential talent they had, and then I got specific with the material.
What I mean is, you sent out a word for them to do a monologue, or in actuality, what did you do? That?
Yeah. The auditions for Our Town, become familiar with the play, bring in a monologue. I think we said preferably because we didn't want to, because you scare off a lot of people with that, and I wanted to make sure I had a bigger pool to draw from, because I wanted to pull in obviously as many people as I could, so that I would have a better, I didn't want to be cut short. I wanted to make sure I had at least enough horses to get it at a certain level.
Right.
And then I did a lot of callbacks.
Wait, let's not get to the callbacks. Sure. Okay. Now, what happened when you had them come in with only preferably monologue? What happened?
Yeah, they would come in. I would, you'd have the little exchange, pleasantries, talking to them, getting a sense of them, and then ask them, okay, well, do you have a monologue? Fair. And they generally would have something, and then they would go ahead and do their monologue or two. Then after that, I would have them read something from the play that I thought was appropriate for somebody I would consider them for. seem to be right for.
Okay. And how did that work?
Meaning, how was the success rate or work in that sense?
Well, you're using a tool.
Mm-hmm.
I want to put people into this play,
Mm-hmm.
and that tool is that they come. Well, first of all, talk about the people who did prepare something.
Mm-hmm.
So after you saw them do that, how did that help you or not help you as a director to cast the play?
Oh, okay. It did help. It did help because it showed me somewhat of what level they were on. For instance, people who got delivered a monologue, like just a dead weight, sent up red flags for me. I said, okay, the person has no sense of what a monologue is, and there was no sense of any natural quality or real. Sounded like very much mechanical, sounded like a line. So that sent up red flags. People that actually had a sense that where they had some sense of what they were doing, and it drew me in. And of course, you could sense talent from that.
What do you mean by talent?
I mean that number one, there's a sense that they are believable, that they are a character in a moment. They're not some person, some actor doing memorized lines, and that they have a quality where they pull you in a little bit, where you're interested in. You're looking at them because there's something going on.
Now, you're an acting teacher, so what about what's pulling you in from an acting teacher's point of view?
Right.
So you should be able to analyze that, not just say somehow they got me.
Yeah, sure. There's a sense of truth to what they're doing. In other words, there's a sense of...
What is the sense of truth?
What is the sense of truth?
What did they do that caused you to feel this person has a sense of truth?
They contacted what the character is going through experientially. They contacted something of that
How do you know?
experience. How do I know? Everything's connected. What they're saying, what they're going through. For instance, if the monologue is about the loss of innocence, you really feel like, there's a sense of
What
loss.
makes you feel that?
What makes you feel that?
What made you, as you watched them, feel that?
They brought themselves to that experience.
Now, do you think acting abilities to the level that they on purpose brought to life the material?
I think a lot of it may be instinct. Intuitive, yeah.
Okay. So, what did you find out? Actually, and I mean, the point of this, so that you...
Well, one thing is that
clear
this kid's got some intuitive
that's
ability.
what you find out.
For
That's what
instance,
you
one that
have.
pops into my mind is that kid that played George. I said, "Oh, this kid has that intuitive."
He's intuitively responsive.
Yes.
Okay. So that can either be good or not, dependent upon what he's intuitively responsive to. Now, if you had somebody who was just terrible, do you remember anybody who just, you said they did a monologue and just...
Oh, yeah. Somebody who sounds like, it's clearly memorized lines. There's nothing natural. There's no sense of
right.
what they're doing.
Why was that? I mean, people in general say, oh, no talent. No, but what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Why was it?
Well, I would say it's the opposite. They did not have the intuition. There was a lack of intuition.
Now, intuitive responsiveness comes from a lot of things. It comes from a certain sensitivity on the part of the individual. It comes from a degree of self-confidence and not self-consciousness, which will allow people to see them, feel, and so forth. Now, the people who are doing this, they don't know they have either of those things particularly. But if you see that, you should be aware of what it is that this person has. Now, can you think of anybody in particular who did an audition where the thing fell like a lox onto the table?
You mean it just was a disaster?
Well, you said to me that I can't remember how you described it. You said the monologue just fell flat or something like that. Can you remember?
Oh, can I remember one specific? You tend to put those ones out of your mind. Obviously, it was. I'm sure. Yeah, this kid who I refused to cast. He had this quality where he's standing on the stage, and the quality he had was, I'm a kid on a stage doing a play. There was no sense of him being in one reality or another, or the experience of the play or in the scene. He was always a kid on the stage, even aware of the audience and aware that he's being watched. And I said, whoa. I said, when he came into audition, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to give him a fair shot.
Do you remember at all what monologue he did? Or what the monologue was about, or what it was like?
No, I just remember that it was very wooden, no real sensitivity to it. And
now, why was it? What's wrong with this kid?
I wish I did. What's wrong with this kid?
Although you don't ever direct anything that you're directing as an acting teacher, the fact that you are an acting teacher gives you
some insight, maybe, but you have you're really putting on a different hat when you direct.
Totally,
Yeah.
Because your allegiance is to the student when you're a teacher, and the material is used as a tool for the student to learn by.
Right, and when you're a director,
is not important for itself.
Right.
When you're a director,
your allegiance is to the
actor
material.
Is nobody unless they're in your play. They don't exist in the world. You don't give a shit about them. Your allegiance is 1,000% to the material and all of its elements we've talked about. One has to know, including why they're named this, why they're aged this, and why it's in Grover's Corners, and all of those things. And what does this all together function to tell at the end? The theme, if you will. I hate to use that word, but.
So getting back, just as he had not developed yet, nothing against the kid, but just for whatever reason, his development so far, he had not, in my eye, developed yet the ability to go into the room. I said, this kid is not in the room. He has not developed the ability to get in the room. Whereas that kid who ended up getting cast as George, I said, wow, this kid is in the room.
Okay, now what's wrong with that kid? He hadn't developed that ability. Why? What would keep him out? What would keep a human being out of that ability? Well, if it's just plain stupid and can't grasp anything that this is about.
And I don't think that's it. Yeah,
that would keep someone out.
Yeah, I don't think that's it.
What else would keep
Because I don't think he was stupid.
Right, so what else would keep someone out? If they're totally...
how about hyper self-conscious?
Well, that's another thing. Hey, can you think of anything else? If somebody's so full of themselves, it's always me doing the thing. I'm acting for you now.
Yeah.
They're never going to get into the play.
Right.
So that's three different things. That
lack of concentration.
Lack of concentration is another thing.
I think maybe a little bit of all three of those elements might have existed in this kid's psyche a little bit. I think he had a lack of concentration. I think he was probably hyper self-conscious, and he may have even had a little bit of that full of yourself thing.
All right. Now, people who are full of themselves are full of themselves for what reason? It's not a genuine assessment of myself, right?
Right.
What is it?
It's probably a defense mechanism for
against what?
The opposite of it. In other words, low self-esteem.
Right. And when people have low self-esteem, why?
Because they generally have been put down. They've generally been told.
And how do you put somebody down?
By saying you're bad, you're not good enough, you're not good enough.
And having that work out.
Having that work? Well, it's usually something that, something they weren't getting at home, or something that they were getting at home that they shouldn't be getting.
Against what, though? What about them made that happen? For instance, let's go to Derek Jeter and tell him, get 100 people in a line all around him, yelling at him, telling him he should never play he's too old, he should never play another game at shortstop, give it up, he wasn't that good beforehand. What do you think he's going to do?
He's going to say, fuck all of you.
Exactly.
I've got nothing to prove to you guys. I've already proven to myself.
If that happened, and he's had all this career and everything else like that, and 100 people said it, and so the next day he goes to Girardi and says, the people mentioned something to me, and I see now it's probably true. Maybe I should just try to DH on the days because I can't play you. What would have happened? How could that possibly happen to a person?
Not sure I follow. You mean if the scenario changes?
No,
and
if
it's not Derek Jeter?
his response, no, if it is Derek Jeter,
Yeah, and his response.
but instead of what we know his response would be, he had the other response.
Well, we'd be very surprised. We'd say, Derek, why are you listening to those guys?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And more than that, what about him would have allowed him to make that change?
Right. A lack of self-confidence. Lack of self-confidence.
Well, we're now going in a circle because I'm trying to get to why do people have lack of self-confidence. And you said because either they haven't been buoyed up or they've been knocked down.
Yeah, right.
And I'm saying, how could you be buoyed up or knocked down if you're Derek Jeter? You wouldn't be. But if Derek Jeter now was knocked down, it would tell you something about his makeup, which is that he has a high sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, because just these people telling him against all of his experience affected him so that now he believes it. He'd have a high sensitivity emotionally. Now, people who try to pretend they're more than they are to compensate for feeling less than they are have a high sensitivity to what people think about them. People who have a lack of concentration have a high sensitivity. Not having a good concentrational level comes from I'm not able now as I'm talking to you to discount the fan and the air conditioner and knowing Diana's in there and knowing that clock up there, which people don't even realize is the clock, is changing and that this light is on and that the Yankees are playing tonight and that anything in the world I can't concentrate on because they're all hitting me and I'm responding to all of them. The more sensitive somebody is, unless they have been trained, the worse their concentration will be. So now we have a kid. The concentration you said wasn't good. He had a little bit of the sense of he's, hot stuff.
Right. And hyper self-conscious.
It's not the overt thing that tells you anything about them. Now, if you were going to use somebody with these particular problems in your play, is there anywhere where it would go?
Is there any place that you would put them? Is that what you're saying? I wouldn't. Because it's weird when to think about, well, it's a high sensitivity, right? That causes somebody to not be able to concentrate. But yet, the expressive person who does well in the audition, let's say, has the ability to express sensitivity.
No, not necessarily. I want to talk to that point. What does somebody who does fairly well in an audition actually tell you?
Who does fairly well?
Yeah.
Well, we discussed the...
Well, I don't want to get to that yet. I want to finish with this.
Okay.
I would cast that kid. I mean, I hadn't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But if the thing that I'm talking about and the things that I am trying to point out now that you have to look for when you're casting, it's not at all the process people think. They come and do, you put them in the play. No, that's the way to get pedestrian plays. So I'm trying to suggest that there is a place in that play where a guy with the kind of sensitivity on that level so much that he has all these behaviors which aren't good for an audition, that where he could go. There's a character in this group.
Well, are you thinking of Simon Stimson?
Of course.
I was looking for someone who did display and have very high sensitivity, yet somebody who had the ability to sort of hold back that sensitivity. In other words, someone who had that Simon Stimson quality of not being true to himself, so therefore there's something repressed in him, and someone who had a certain maturity level too, because I felt that was needed in that part, particularly because of Act 3 says to Emily that he of all the dead people, he's still holding on to some bitterness.
Well, he doesn't know he is.
He doesn't know that he's bitter.
He's only responding.
You mean Simon? He doesn't. Yeah. He's not aware that he's what?
He's not aware that he's bitter. He's only still responding. The audience will know he's bitter.
Yeah.
But sometimes somebody will say something. You say, "Why are you being so snippy?" I say, "I wasn't being snippy," but they were being snippy. They didn't realize it. But you've described somebody who would have a difficulty expressing himself. Might even have a difficulty in how well he speaks because he has so much going on with him and a number of patterns of behavior that come from the fact that he had a high level of sensitivity. That sensitivity had been hurt. That's the guy you were just talking about before. and I refused to cast him. That's a guy who's ready-made to play somebody who can't express himself well and all of that kind of thing. Now, in addition to this,
I don't see him I still don't see him having that ability to go into the room. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
I wanted to cast people that already at least know how to get into the room.
But you don't teach him how to act, but you provide circumstances in recognition of who he is and what his problems are in relation to that. The way I provided those circumstances to the lesbian woman who never dressed nice and who never wore makeup.
By showing her the costume, you mean?
By showing the costume, showing her how she's going to look, encouraging. She came in with her own hairdo. Nobody told me don't come in with straight hair, and was very frilly. She did makeup, and was gorgeous for it. She was just.
And you said you knew she had that part in her. And that's the key, that they have to have the part in them. I mean, that's one of your.
I knew that because she behaved like she did in life, and that she was indeed a woman. And even though she sits in front of the television when everybody's trying to sell all of these products for women to make them more beautiful, and disdains it because that's not how she was going to live to try to be attractive to men, I'm not interested. I know that regardless of her political decision about who she was made that she was a woman, and she had been affected by that all of her life, and that there was in any woman the desire to be pretty, to be thought of as pretty in some circumstances. Now, for herself, no. Politically, no. Lesbian, straight, I'm not doing all that. I'm not performing any of these things for men.
And are you purposely and you're not purposely casting against type, are you?
That's jargonized. Casting against type, jargonized.
You're seeing that she has this part inside of her that does dress very feminine.
Because I know women in this sense. Nobody has no femininity. They may choose not to pursue it, or life may have chosen for them, don't pursue it because you're not going to get anywhere.
Well, you wouldn't have cast any woman in that part. What made you feel that despite the way she acts in life, where she clearly has made a political decision not to dress for men, what made you think that she would come alive in this role of a woman who does dress for men clearly and is quite feminine?
Because I know something about actors, which is they are actors first. She may have been a lesbian in life, but on stage she was an actress.
Mm-hmm.
She had the same dirty little secret that I talked about in the acting class. The actor wants one thing more than anything else, and that is the audience think they're wonderful.
Right. But that's every actor. What made you know she was the one for this part? Not just, you know what I mean?
Because the things I said before about being a woman, that she is a woman, and that she would have been appealed to. She has feminine qualities. She has the sense. She knows what it means to be pretty, and that it's liked. She may not want a man to decide it for her.
Right. But can't that be said for every woman and every actress? In other words, I'm trying to figure out why you felt this specific woman was right for this part.
Because having banished this from her life,
right, now
for whatever reason, I knew that in a play, she'd love to do it.
She would come alive.
Because in a play, that's not you.
So you would.
That wasn't a threat to her ego structure. That wasn't a challenge to her ego structure. That wasn't an irritant to her ego structure. Because she wasn't her. She was the character in the play. There's always been a thing about acting that some people realize and others don't, which is the real pleasure in acting is to be able to live through experiences and do things you wouldn't do. You're free.
Does that mean you would stay away from casting a woman who is already expressing those qualities in life?
Because she's only going to do her own personality. I don't want her doing her personality.
Would you say that you almost always cast it?
No, I cast for what's inside.
Yeah.
Not.
But is it always something that is the opposite of what's outside?
No, it's often not just that it's opposite. Sometimes it's not even being addressed.
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to suggest to you this young kid who had difficulty.
Who I'm still refusing.
No. I'm not talking about please cast it.
No.
I'm only saying, why is it...
You're saying look beyond what?
More than that.
Beyond the beyond. You know what I mean?
More than that, I'm saying, who is he? And why did he behave the way he behaved in the audition? Mm-hmm. Not, he didn't do well in the audition. Who could have ever auditioned? You said Kazan and?
we're talking about
Rebel
references
Without a
James
Cause?
Dean? Yeah.
You couldn't have auditioned James Dean. Auditioned?
You mean like had him read from the material?
No. Have you read about it? He was almost incapable of having a conversation because he was so personally damaged emotionally, and he was so highly sensitive. Because I've heard him described that just in a normal conversation, it was too much for him.
Now,
and I tell you what Strasberg said about Marilyn Monroe, which most of the time you don't get her in her movies, but sometimes there's a quality of it, which is excellent. He said she was the most sensitive in the realm of an actress. She was the most highly sensitive and responsive person that he ever worked with, by far.
The most highly sensitive
and responsive.
Wow.
Now, you don't see that in most of her things because she looks like she's doing Marilyn Monroe things. It's because directors didn't know how to use her. But Lee said he saw her do a scene from Anna Christie once, which broke his heart. Now, when you're working with people and you're good at casting, I'm very good at it because I do the things I'm trying to get you to start to do.
Right.
And it's not because I'm good at it. It's because of what I do. Anybody doing that is going to be very good at it. Now, with the boy, I'm only trying to say, before we leave him behind, I'm only trying to say, when you audition him, you have to be able to read what is actually happening in that person which caused the results that you witnessed. And if you had done the kind of a thing that I had described, why did somebody do this badly? Why was he? What were elements? High self-consciousness and a lack of self-confidence, a sense of trying to nonetheless show off, and scattered concentration. What are those symptoms of a high sensitivity? And an inability to open it up to people easily. And that is what Simon Stimson is still, in the third act, angry about. If he had ever been able to express his bitterness, he would be better now. The expression of something means it goes out of me. So what I'm trying to get you to do is say, when you see something, what are you actually seeing? You have to be aware of that. You have to know people, how do they behave? You have to be able to ask yourself so you can actually evaluate the person, not say, gee, I wouldn't want him to do that in my play. He's not going to do that in the first place in your play. When he presents something to you, you haven't worked with him, you haven't told him the right things to do. But in a play, when you're directing and casting, and this is what we're going to get to later on, more definitely when I say I'm going to talk to you, how do you work with the actors now? How do you work with them? But you haven't worked with them yet. All you know is that in this audition, he had picked to do a monologue that went flat, and you wouldn't want him to do something like that in your play. No, you got to know more than that. And what his problems are what you want. When you have a character like Simon Stimson, you have to fulfill. If Simon Stimson in life had been able to express his bitterness, he wouldn't still be bitter when he's dead. It would be gone. So you have to have somebody who can't express his bitterness, even though he tries and has bitter things to say. He's obviously drawn as a homosexual man who lived through life, had to marry a woman, and who had to pretend he wasn't to everybody, and who, nonetheless, because he is homosexual, has moments where it expresses itself, like when he's directing them to sing
in the choir.
So you got a guy right there who's
remember, ladies, music come into the world to give pleasure,
but not like that. That's what the line says, but that's a nice genial man saying. Remember, ladies, music was brought into the world to give people pleasure. All right, let's do it again. All that attitude is not only homosexual, but all that attitude is part of his homosexuality. Because sarcasm and bitterness, resentment, and not being able to just be yourself. When you are resentful, you're caustic about other people who are doing things that you have to deal with when they're not pleasing you. And even when they're pleasing you, you might give them a left-handed compliment. Well, it's only better than yesterday, girls. Instead of saying, it's nicer tonight.
Yeah.
This is more what we need. Okay, you cast somebody because you think they can do it.
Right.
And by do it, I mean the depths of it.
Right.
I don't mean the surface level of it. A pretty girl who's already pretty and is used to being pretty will give you something that's all right. Naturalistic pretty. In the Guy de Maupassant short story with the Countess and the Marquise, it'll be all right. But a woman who has a chance now to do it for the first time and very good and be adored for it.